guys were wanting to put the old model. But secondly, because of the shutdown in Cornell, I just never got around to removing it. Don't look at it. The only model that should be of interest to anybody is the 2019 version. It's much better. The previous version would incorrectly prescribe things on some occasions. So with that sort of introduction, let me share just a couple of slides. I didn't make a lot of slides, but I do want to give the slides that have sort of the carbohydrate model for I think it's 4 locations in the Hudson Valley. Let me see, where do I want to So what do you all see? Just the slide I'm presenting?
Now we see the slide you're presenting, yes.
Okay. So I started in the southern part of the Hudson Valley and did Walden, then I did Milton, and then I did Hudson Valley, and then I threw in Valatia in Columbia County. They all have the similar results, but things get worse as you get up in the Valatia, which is a little hard to understand, but I'll try to go through it with you. May 25th is where we are now. It's highlighted in green. Where's my cursor? Predicted temperatures of 74 in the day and 48 at night. Relatively dark skies at 15 megajoules. Remember, a bright sky is 27, 28 megajoules. Really, really dark is 10 or 8. So 15 is kind of a low sunlight level, giving a deficit today of about minus 51. But the 7-day average, and this is what the newer version of the model gives, it gives some weight to the 2 days before, which were, one was an extremely low deficit on the 23rd of minus 100. And then a more moderate one yesterday, a pretty severe deficit today, a more serious one predicted for tomorrow and the next day, and then a really serious deficit on the 28th. And so those numbers, the average, which is 2 days before, the day of, and 4 days after, 7-day period, are going to probably go quite negative, much more negative by the time we get to the 28th. That is worrisome. Now, in the particular case of Walden, my recommendation, now what you see there in words is simply my table that I made up with all of the experience I have on what you should do. And there's arbitrary limits. So when that 7-day average gets below, I think minus 60, it says cut rates by 50%. If it's less than minus 60, it says cut rates by 30%. But if it goes really negative, which you'll see in the Valatia, it says don't thin at all. Now at this point, I want to stop and say, nature causes thinning on its own without our chemical intervention. Anytime we get average deficits of minus 60 or greater, we're going to get some thinning. So you already had some thinning naturally from what happened on the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, and what's going to happen as we go forward. So what you see out there on the tree is not really what's out there on the tree. And this is what's so complicated about it and so difficult, to know that Mother Nature's already causing some fruits to not get enough carbohydrate, and they're in the process of dropping. We just can't tell it yet. Their growth rates have probably slowed the last couple days, and several of them will fall. Now, with frost damage, it makes it extremely difficult to know exactly how much chemical to put on, because we're already in the middle of a natural thinning event. And I have some comments about what I'm going to say you should do as we get near the end. But let's look at Milton. Very similar situation, not quite as cloudy as Walden, so but deficit still below minus 60 average yesterday and today. We're still not at the magic sort of, not magic, the sweet spot of thinning, which is 200-degree days to 250, that's going to come up starting on the 27th. But by the 29th, we'll be at the end of that period. But those days that we're in right now are giving very high deficits and some natural thinning. If we look at the Hudson Valley lab, it's quite a similar story, although not quite as bad as Milton and Walden for some reason, in that the deficits averaged are only the minus 50, but I don't know what the difference between a minus 50 and a minus 60 really is. They're just serious deficits. But it moderates for a couple days. But as we look forward to on the 28th, we have, instead of a daily deficit of minus 90, we have only a minus 60, and then a minus 40, and a predicted 20 positive. When I look at Valencia, it's hard to understand, it's just the weather stations and the forecast. It has these very serious deficits. We've been through a minus 100 on the 23rd when we had 80 degrees and not that bright of a day. And then today, a minus 93 because it's predicted to be almost, the 77 with a 17 light. And then a minus 81 tomorrow, minus 74, and some serious daily deficits on the 27th and 28th and 29th in Valencia. The model assumes all that's correct. And when you get that kind of deficits where the average is below minus 80, you're going to get a lot of fruits fall off. It's like you hammered them with a high rate of thinner. And that's why I'm suggesting for today up there, you do not thin. And if you're going to thin later and you think you need to thin, reduce rates by 50%. But I want to emphasize that when you go through these kind of deficits, you get a lot of thinning in addition to the chemical-induced thinning. So a couple of suggestions. I think it's critical to know what you've got in your block to try to make decisions. Now, if kings are present, on many Hudson Valley blocks, the damage was so great that many kings are not present. So this might apply to only a few sites and the best locations. So if the kings are present and there's at least 3 laterals, I think you should thin following exactly what the model says and reduce rates according to the recommendation when you get to the 200, somewhere between the 200 and the 250 degree day window. But if kings are absent, or mostly absent, and there's only 2 or 3 laterals, I think you just have to wait out this heat. Wait till after the heat wave passes, and then thin when it's much more moderate carbohydrate deficits. Now, thirdly, if you need the fruit from lateral bloom to make a full crop, and you put thinner on right now, you're going to take all the lateral bloom off. So wait until the heat passes and then thin with conservative rates, because the fruit on lateral wood, the fruit from lateral bloom on 1-year wood will thin really easily. And we can just knock it off with these kind of with these kind of deficits and this kind of heat. So if you're relying on some of that fruit, don't thin right now in this heat wave and wait till it passes. Second, I repeat a couple things I said earlier. I don't think you should put any thinner on at the bottom half of the tree at this time. At the petal fall timing, I think there's justification to put some thinner on in the bottom half, but not at the 10, 11, 12 millimeter. No thinner in the bottom half. Completely shut those nozzles off. Don't use any surfactants. But the main message is that I've been preaching that you should measure fruitlet diameters. I don't know how badly to chastise you. Does somebody have any fruitlet diameter data for me? Now, Donna Simovich sent me data for the first measurement this morning or yesterday, but I need the second measurement. So with no data from anybody in the Hudson Valley, we're flying blind. And I just can't believe we jeopardize our entire crop and nobody will measure fruits. Because if you could tell me how many fruits are really growing right now, we could talk more seriously about how to not overthin. So it's just really frustrating that you guys haven't listened and haven't participated in measuring the diameters like we need. And so I'm now in a position trying to give you advice, not knowing how many fruits are out there. Sorry for the strong words, but we have a system that could help specifically in these situations, but nobody's done it. Now, I'd like to answer questions the best I can and help the best I can so that we don't get into overthinning. So I open the floor for questions.
Fuck you.
Thank you, Terence. If anyone has questions at this point, you can unmute yourself.
Terence, Win Kogel, I've got data on measurements in North Jersey if you would like it.
I would love to see it.
Sure.
Hey, Terence, Jeff Christ, can you hear me?
Yep, I can, Jeff.
Thank you for doing this. Much appreciated. When there's so much natural thinning likely to be occurring, and I'm afraid I know the answer to this, but how do we know how much to thin a day later when it's not so risky if the thinning was already done and it might not have provided enough time for measurements to show what fruit naturally thinned?
Well, that's an excellent point, Jeff. Mother Nature is giving us a thinning event as we speak and over the last couple of days. We won't be able to assess that even if we were measuring fruits until maybe we could start the first measurement tomorrow and measure and be able to assess what we got out of this natural thinning event. But I wish we could get that kind of data. So, and I go back to just those three basic points. If you've got a really strong crop where the kings are there, I would probably not thin on the worst days, but try to wait, you know, to the 250, 260 degree days, 270 degree days, and then follow the model. If the model says reduce rates by 30%, reduce rates by 30%. But where we have the damage in kings, and we now know that we've had a thinning event from the weather, I think the best strategy is the conservative wait it out. Get out there and measure some fruits tomorrow and then 4 days later and send me the data and let us decide how to attack this on Saturday evening or Monday. And there'll still be time if we find that we've got still way too many fruits that are growing, we still have time next Monday to attack it. But to attack it right now is flying completely blind.
Thank you, Terence.
Plus, I think it's kind of risky with the, well, not it's risky. The chemicals are so powerful when we get these kind of temperatures. So you combine a very powerful chemical response with the natural carbohydrate deficit response that already is going to thin, and that's where we get over thinning. This kind of situation is very scary to me. I would rather wait it out.
Hi, Terence. It's Jenny Christcone.
Yes.
Should the degree day sweet spot line up with a particular size of fruit? Because
It generally lines up with about 12 millimeter fruit.
Okay. We're already at 12 millimeter on quite a few things. But
So
it seems
this
like
variety,
the model says we're not there yet on the degree days.
yeah, this matching of degree days with fruit size was developed for three varieties: Delicious, Macintosh, and Gala. Now they all grow at different rates, so it's the average of the three, but it generally lines up that when you're at the 200 degree day, you're at the 12 millimeter king fruit size diameter. But even if you're 13 or 14 or 15 millimeters, you can still get thinning, especially when you combine it with this natural event that's happening. So I think that maybe you should not worry too much about the sweet spot because I don't think many places need strong thinning this year. What we're trying to avoid is over thinning. Now, in some of the questions you posed to me, both Dan and others have commented how 2014, we tended to continue to get drop, and ended up with too light of a crop because of these natural carbohydrate deficits that happened even after we were done thinning. And so we still have that to face, whether we're going to face more big deficit periods in the month of June. And given the fact that many kings were damaged and the laterals maybe are strong, but maybe not, I think it just is a year for caution and to avoid this heat wave. And I'd just love to see how many actual fruits are growing. If your target, just to have an easy number, is 100, and you only have 150 fruits that are growing, it's extremely risky to thin. But if you have on a tree still 500 fruits growing, then you really have to try to go forward and thin. But it's hard for me to know exactly how many fruits are on a tree relative to the target number without having some hard data.
Do you have a recommendation for later on for Snapdragon and Ruby Frost, particularly?
Yeah, so we've done more work with Snapdragon than we have Ruby Frost. And so let me comment on Snapdragon. It generally thins quite easy as a young tree. And so I have to distinguish between blocks that are still relatively young, either 3rd year or 4th year. But once you get to the 5th year and onward, we've had to up rates to get it to thin properly. And we've had extremely good luck with an NA and 7 at petal fall and then a Maxell and 7, but a full dose at the 10 to 12 to 13 millimeter. The problem is this year that we've had this event or this series of events, the frost and now this carbohydrate deficits, that I'm assuming we're going to get a fair amount of natural thinning. And so we would probably suggest wait it out until late in the week or even next Monday and then follow the model. I don't remember the data. No, I do remember the one that Donna Simovic collected for us at Hudson Valley Lab. I think Snapdragon was one that had some of the least damage to kings. Honeycrisp and Snapdragon were the ones that had the least damage, whereas Empire had a tremendous damage to kings. So given that, if you have the kings present with Snapdragon, I just wait this period out. And if it's possible to measure fruits tomorrow and then go back and measure them Friday or Saturday and send me the data, we can then make an assessment and determine whether we're going to need to thin on Monday or not, and what rates we ought to spray with. So I'd like to suggest for both Snapdragon and Ruby Frost that just go measure some fruits and give me the data, and then we can make a more informed decision for a Monday spray. Assuming Monday's a decent spray day, I don't even know what it's going to be like. But the forecast that I just went through earlier showed that it really moderates. That's Valatia, but if you go back to Milton or Walden, it really moderates once you get past the 30th or to the 30th. We get brighter sunshine, so even though temperatures are still in the mid-70s, that bright sunshine gives us a positive carbohydrate balance.
Do you think we're hurting our return bloom by waiting?
You're certainly not, I don't think, with Snapdragon. We don't seem to have that much biennial bearing. But with Honeycrisp, if we're carrying an excessive number of fruits right now, we are already starting to hurt our return bloom. Now, what's an excessive number? If your target is 100 Honeycrisp and you're carrying 5 times that number of fruit right now, with each of those fruits having, well, the easy math is just 10 seeds. So if you're carrying 500 fruits and they had 10 seeds and you got 5,000 seeds out there, that is hurting you. But if loss of kings and your petal fall, then I should stop and say, just looking at the carbohydrate balance, if you put on a petal fall spray, we should have gotten a fairly decent response. When we're up here in these, you know, the 120s, we had some decent deficits. So it should have got really good thinning from the petal fall spray. And I'd love to see data either saying that's true or not true with the fruit growth measurements. And so that's what I'm going to see from Donna Simovic's data. She just took her first measurement yesterday, and so it's going to be Thursday before I get any data out of it. But I'm assuming we got good thinning there, Jenny, so that if the number of Honeycrisp fruits that is growing, if your target's 100, if we're below, I would say 200 fruits that are still growing, I think we'll be fine on return rule. But if we're 500 fruits, then we get in trouble already.
Terence, this is Russ Bartolotta. Thank you for doing this today. I did about on the 18th or 19th, I used Amethyst. It was between late bloom and petal fall, 8 ounces to the acre on some high ground on some snapdragons. And it looked like it did a very good job with that. Now I'm just sitting here waiting. Dan, you saw him today, didn't you, up at Apple Annie? Dan, down here?
Yes, I did, Russ. And yes, it looked like there was some thinning there down to singles, doubles, and a few triples. And some on your galas too, where you had done this. It worked.
And see, that's one of the things I'm expecting, because this is a really good year at the petal fall timing for thinning. It's one of the best years for petal fall thinning.
But that's on high ground. I mean, I don't want to do that on every place, but
yeah.
But I'm just going to sit there and wait and see what the. What would you say? There's 6-7 millimeters. The Snapdragon.
Yeah. So you can.
Yeah. The stuff in Columbia County. I'm sitting here in Valatia right now and worked my way up today, and generally things are 6 to 9 millimeters.
But that means, Russ, that you can just wait this heat out. You don't need to thin right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wait it out and then see where we are. But I think for Jenny and Jeff and others in the more southern part of Ulster County, I assume you put on a petal fall spray, and I think it's going to work fairly well. So I think we don't have to be rushing right now. We can just wait. And the more I think about it, just talking with you, I think that's maybe probably what everybody should do, is just wait.
What's the top range where things start to get iffy when you're using, say, Maxell, and you're using all this stuff on millimeter size? Where's like the, what would you say?
The effectiveness of Maxell sort of starts to drop off once the kings get to 15 millimeters. However, I'm going to talk about it in our future meetings, that if we get to 15 millimeters and there's still too much, we've had excellent success at 18 millimeters, 16, 17, or 18 millimeters by adding a pint of oil to the Maxell 7 mix. Now, that's been in years with no frost. I think with the thinning we're going to get naturally from these deficits and the petal fall thinning, you're probably going to be pretty close, and just some Maxell 7 when the fruit's fairly big will probably do a great job. But I had been hoping that I could be in a position to talk with more data to back up what I'm guessing from fruit growth measurements.
Terence, it's John Clements.
Yeah.
If you're just in the more northern areas, you're just putting your petal fall sprays on now. Full rate, reduced rate, what would you suggest? I mean, don't skip that petal fall stuff right now, right?
So if you're somewhere around the 100 degree days to 125 degree days, I don't think you should skip the petal fall spray, even with heat. Now, the 18-year study we did showed over 18 years, we had a couple of years where we had warm temperatures at petal fall. We never over-thinned, but we got really good thinning, almost everything we needed out of that one spray. So I think I'd go forward with your petal fall spray if you're in that still 5 millimeter 6 millimeter range.
Max are
When
about max are about 6 millimeters.
So even in the heat, I'd go forward with it with this one proviso, that you didn't lose all your kings in the frost and that you'd have a reasonable number of live flowers out there. And whether or not my number of 40% is right or wrong, that's just basically what I've been saying this year. If you've got 40% of the, or more of the kings gone, say 50% are gone, or 60 or 70, I wouldn't put on the full rates. I think a moderate dose at petal fall might just do everything you need.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Terrence, Bob Fix.
Yeah, Bob.
Hey, do you have any information on Evercrisp?
Yeah, I wish that I had been, when I took my 3 years, I should have been working on Evercrisp every one of those 3 years, but I wasn't here. So our experience is limited to just 2 years. And we've been a little disappointed that we sent to set Evercrisp lighter than what we want and tend to over thin it with what we've done. I don't know, is that your experience, Bob?
Well, I was told, they thin very easy. And 2 years ago, I put a light, or I didn't thin them at all, and they overcropped and they totally blanked out last year. So they definitely need something. And they had a strong bloom again this year.
Yeah. So my trees that I work with here at the station are about 5 years old. I need more experience with that variety, but my experience so far is that we have tended to over thin them with our normal full rates. So I would tend to put a Macintosh type rate on them, but we have also experienced the biennial bearing issue that you mentioned. So it's one that I think we should be focused on, some blossom thinning or some NAA at bloom or something at bloom. I like ATS at bloom, and then a petal fall, significant petal fall, and maybe trying to treat it like in McCowan's, we have to thin at petal fall to get repeat bloom. I think Evercrisp, we also have to thin at petal fall to get repeat bloom, but not as high rates as with McCowan.
Okay. One other question: would carb be also a danger at in these temperatures?
It's much less of a danger. NAA and to a certain extent Maxell are what cause the over-thinning.
So if you were going to thin something with just carb, you could just go and not worry about it?
Yeah, I would worry much less if I was just putting carb out.
Okay.
But I want to emphasize to you, Bob, why? Why not just wait it out?
Mm-hmm. All right.
I don't think there's much upside to trying to thin when you've got daily deficits in -60, -70, -90, -100. There's just no upside to that. Wait.
I did put on a pretty good petal fall spray on Honeycrisp. And Dan, did you look at Honeycrisp today?
Yeah, up on your Willerton farm, and they're set. Didn't really see much of an effect at this point developing.
Okay.
But Bob, that's where if you were to measure some fruits or send out somebody in your gang to measure fruitlets, we could tell.
Well, you definitely can. Yeah, you convinced me. We're gonna we'll start doing some of that.
I could tell how much you're getting out of that petal fall spray, but and the fact that it's so going to be so warm, has been warm, and the deficits we're expecting. If everybody just waited until Monday, everybody measured fruits, we could all just feel a lot better about what we're going to do next Monday. Now, Jeff, I don't know if you're still on. What's the fruit size that you have down in Walden or even further south?
It, of course, depends on variety, but ginger golds are 12 to 14 millimeters. Same with ruby frost, where the kings are available to measure. Snapdragon, Gala are down a size, but approaching 12 millimeters in Orange County. Give you a little feel. Honeycrisp, variable, but the kings even up in Milton, I just measured them now, are as much as 12 millimeters right now.
So we can just think forward. Generally, when it's this warm, we're going to grow almost a millimeter a day. So the day is what? Monday. Another 7 days will be 7 more millimeters. We'll be up at the upper limit of where we can thin. So I think maybe you're in the little bit of the more difficult situation where you're probably going to need to thin before next Monday. Well, let me express one other experience in the 18-year study we did and how the carbohydrate balance seemed to either explain or not explain things. When we were approaching in any of those years significant deficits of lower than minus 60, you know, remember in that 18-year study, we sprayed every 3 days, no matter what the temperature was. So the sprays that went on immediately before these big deficits is where we got massive thinning. When we sprayed right in the middle of these big deficits, we got less thinning, but still a lot of thinning, but not as much as when it was right before the big deficits hit. So we're kind of right in the middle now of this heat wave. We still got 3 or 4 days to go. I would say that when you get on the tail end of the heat wave, you can go ahead and spray without as much risk as if we're spraying at the beginning or in the early part of the heat wave. Well, that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is a bad day, Friday. I think you could spray on Saturday and be just fine, Jeff. Assuming that it doesn't rain on you or you got other problems.
Makes some sense. Thank you. Is it against the law to be on Zoom while you're driving?
No, it's just very ambitious.
Yeah, Terence, it's Rod Dressel, Jr. So again, the other thing that we haven't talked much about was this 2-week, 3-week bloom thing. We have galas that are, 12 millimeters in the bottom and 4 millimeters in the tops of the trees. There's a real disparity on a lot of these blocks. And I was just measuring them, and as Jeff said, we were in the 10, 11 millimeter, and there could be 4 lateral flowers or fruitlets, all 11 millimeters. And then, 2 limbs up, there's 2 apples and they're like 4 millimeters. So yeah, it's really confusing looking out there, knowing what to do. I did put a petal fall spray on 1 gala block, the one that had kings left in it, last Thursday. And so, yeah, I'll go out and take some measurements of that this year too.
Well, let me comment a little bit about that issue. Where you've got kings that are really big in the lower part of the tree, I want to make sure if you're looking at the upper part of the tree, you're also looking at kings, because the protracted bloom often is confused a little bit because those bloom on 1-year wood opens up so much later. So if it's on 1-year wood and it's a king, we can generally knock that off. If there are no kings left on the top that are of the original spurs, then it's a different situation. But I just want to make sure when you're looking at the differences in fruit size, you're looking at the spurs and the king flowers in the spurs. I can think there would probably be only a 2 or 3 millimeter difference between the top and the bottom, but maybe I'm wrong. I wish I was there to see it in person. But my comment about the thinning is, if the kings in the bottom get to 15 and the kings in the top are at 12 and the laterals in the top are at 10, that's when we get really good thinning of all that lateral fruit in the top of the tree. We can knock it off, but we won't knock off many kings in the lower part by waiting till they get to 15, and then the kings up in the top of the tree at 12, they will also not fall off, but we will clean off all of the lateral fruit. So where we've got differences in size, I like to wait until the lower ones get bigger and closer to 15 millimeters before we spray. We won't knock them off. We won't knock off the 12 millimeter kings, but we'll knock off everything else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Not a lot of kings in the blocks I was looking at today. We're over here quite a ways from the river, and not a lot of kings left over here, top or bottom.
Well, when the kings get frosted out, the tree is really going to put more resources into one of the laterals. And generally there's gonna be one that's slightly bigger than the others. That's the one that will resist dropping when you put chemicals on it. So if you wait till that one, whichever one it is in the cluster, gets closer to 15 millimeters and spray, then we'll probably do a pretty good job of knocking off all of the smaller ones that aren't the dominant fruit in that cluster.
Yeah, and thanks for your comments on carbaryl too, because I was thinking the same thing of using just a lot of carbaryl and very judicious on the acid and Maxell this year.
Yeah. Anybody else have a thought or a question? So I really appreciated Dan's email alert that he sent out this morning. I didn't read it until later in the day, but I thought it was right on. And I want to just ask Dan if you've got any other comments you want to add.
Well, I'll just say that I'll measure up a couple of blocks tomorrow. If you guys are out there looking for calipers, I had mentioned the other day that Lowe's had a really nice one for 20 bucks. Carbon fiber, very light. I've been using it the last few days. It's fantastic. Harbor Freight also has $15, $16 inexpensive digital calipers if you need them. If you need some instructions, give me a call tomorrow. I'll be out there doing this and I can explain how to set it up for you. And Terrence, if you could send me your most recent spreadsheet, I appreciate that.
Okay. I was looking down at if anybody had typed questions, and I see that the one Wynn said he'll send me North Jersey data, but there's also a question for recommendations for Suffolk County. So I haven't run the model for Suffolk County, but whoever posed that question, can you tell me a little bit about what the situation is in Suffolk County?
He says he has no microphone.
Okay. Well, I guess what I would do then is run the model, and maybe if you send me an email, I can give you some thoughts for Suffolk County. I haven't really heard. Did you have frost damage, or you got kings, or you got full crop, no crop? So I just don't know what's happened in Suffolk County.
He said no frost down there, he said.
Okay, so great. Send me an email and I'll run the model and give you some thoughts.
Terrence, when you're just thinning with 7, sometimes it doesn't discriminate. It just takes apples off. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, but it will discriminate between a more dominant flower within the cluster and laterals. Almost all thinners do that. We've had this impression that some don't, but the most dominant flower will resist abscission much better than the other laterals.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, thank you everyone for joining us.
Okay, have a good day, and I hope we can work together and make this a success.
Thank you, Terrence.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Terrence.